All right, guys, welcome to our, I think it's going to be training number 7 for the therapist training program. I was just making sort of like a document that really highlights the trainings that we've covered and the training that's still there to be happening. And I'm really excited about the next few days. Today, we're going to be talking about addiction. Addiction is my forte. This is the topic that I've spent most of my early career on. It is the topic that led me to understanding trauma work primarily. And so I have an understanding from a few lenses when it comes to addiction. Number one, from a practitioner's lens in terms of the challenges that the therapists kind of have when they're working with addiction. From a family lens in terms of someone who is working with the family, what are the challenges that come when you're managing someone who is suffering from addiction but the family is also suffering along with it. So we will be going through all of those things, but most importantly, also the thing that I will be kind of overviewing today is going to be about love addiction, love avoidance, right? Which is a non-chemical addiction, specifically focusing on love addiction. And we'll kind of work on all of those aspects of it because in our culture, particularly, we have overt addictions that everyone is kind of aware of. However, we have covert addictions as well, process-based addictions that people aren't really aware of, but they don't know what the mechanisms are. So we'll be looking into Pia Melody again in from her book Facing Codependency to be able to kind of really get a better information about these things. Okay. The training, I wanted to kind of just take a minute as well to kind of overview the nature of this training, also the intention behind this and the way this is formatted. This training is a very content-based training. What that means is that it's sort of like in lecture format, right? Where a lot of the information is being provided on one side. People who are at Zoom are kind of open to asking questions, and they're open to kind of asking for feedback and in the chat box particularly, and we can kind of address any of the concerns that are there. The intention behind this is not generally the way I do trainings, right? So the way I do trainings is in-person, experiential at the Center Trauma Release and Wellness Center. I've been doing trainings for the last 4 years. Some trainings are internationally affiliated. What that means is that I have a certain format that I have to follow for the content to be covered, and I still try to kind of put my own spin on it in terms of making it experiential, making it relevant. Some trainings I have a lot more creative freedom with in order to be able to understand. So I personally do enjoy a very experiential kind of approach when it comes to trainings. However, I also felt that it's important to have this content out there, right? I really felt that the information that is available, I think there needs to be a place where this can be useful for people, useful for therapists, have an abundant kind of space where it can be made out in public. And due to the extensive public nature of this training, particularly, that's one of the main reasons why this has been kind of made very kind of lecture oriented, super content heavy in terms of the way it's done. I really invite the Zoom participants, particularly, if you have questions, put them on the chat box. It really makes it very engaging. It makes it sort of like it adds a lot of value to the training, even to those people who are not here with us and are watching it kind of online on YouTube. We're getting an average of like 100 people who are watching it on YouTube. So I really appreciate the people who are kind of receiving this information, and I'm hoping that they can kind of benefit from the recordings that is available as well. For anyone who wants to kind of purchase the recordings or kind of get the certifications, if anyone's interested in kind of doing that, what we would like, and the intention is that you would have to do a 20-minute mock session, right? A mock session is basically a session in which you have a friend or you have someone you know, and you're just kind of role playing therapist client situation, right? And what you will do is you will kind of put an audio recording to it, right? And what we're just doing, and you send it to us, and what we will do is we'll give feedback to you, right? In terms of, okay, this is what we're noticing. Because what we have learned in our center is that even with mock sessions, you get to know a lot of the muscle memory that's kind of in place, habits, style, languaging, words, all of those things that are visible, because whoever you are as a person, those are integrated within you in your physiology. So you will be using that even in the mock session. And so it becomes a really safe way for you to explore the style of therapy that you're providing and what are the areas that you can have feedback over and what are the areas that you can improve on. The intention is that you would send that recording and we'll give you feedback, and that allows you to kind of just see how to use the content that we have covered over the course of these 11 weeks into your therapeutic practice. Hopefully what we do is that in the recording that you're going to be sending, we can give you reference points in terms of, okay, you can improve your humanistic, or Gestalt could be added, or CBT can be added, or anything or the other, primarily regulation, questions of attunement, whatever the feedback is, it's meant and designed to just help you become better, right? And that is the intention of this whole therapist training program, is just to help you become better. The intention is also to give accountability to the therapists themselves about the levels of therapeutic work there is, right? Sometimes what happens is that when you have practitioners coming into the field, there is this kind of bias that I have now completed my training and thus I am ready, right? Or whatever I have learned in university, that's the way it is outside. And I want to really kind of enhance this awareness that there are so many levels to becoming a great therapist, right? And completing your qualifications is the first level. And then the next level is learning about yourself and attunement, and then understanding client work. And I hope this journey continues for anyone who's been interested in this. And I really appreciate everyone who supported this training as well. Okay. On that note, I really wanted to kind of start on addiction today. And addiction is like how do I say this? One of my favorite topics, right? I used to work in the rehab. My early 4 or 5 years are all about rehab work. So there are many different languages that I've learned about how people talk about addiction, right? So I wanted to kind of start off because by just giving a little bit of a brief about, okay, how do you look at addiction? Right? What's the way you got to look at this lens, right? Because there are many different cultural types, stereotypes, and kind of updated information as well. The way I look at it is a lot from the Gabor Mate lens, in which it really identifies addiction as something that provides you pleasure in the short run and pain in the long run, right? Addiction, another way of describing addiction is that addiction itself is not the problem, but it's the solution to a problem, right? And as a therapist, you want to be very curious about what is the problem that you're trying to solve. There are certain other kind of questions about whether it's a genetic disposition or whether it's not a genetic disposition, and there are many different researchers that have really kind of identified different characteristics that lead to addictive kind of natures, having sort of like high cortisol levels. So I want to be able to share what's the way I look at addiction, right? Like, what's the way that I encourage therapists to look at addiction as well? And it's very much informed from that lens of Gabor Mate's work, trauma integration, trauma informed lens as well. Okay. So if I was to start, I would kind of start by, this is the way someone else had kind of explained it to me. I'm going to start by just drawing up a whiteboard and really kind of just share some of the ways. So imagine there is this boy, girl, whoever, called Fred. Okay. And Fred is an addict, right? And you have many different people who are kind of even sort of like uncomfortable with that word, addict. What does that mean? I don't want to be considered myself an addict. In 12 steps program, you're kind of asked to identify yourself as an addict so that the hubris or the denial kind of breaks, which is one of the main defense mechanisms that someone going through substance abuse kind of goes through, chemical or non-chemical. So what they say is that an addict is the last person to find out that they're an addict. Everyone around them will know beforehand, right? So for example, if I have a drug problem, right, then I will be the last person to find out that I have a drug problem, right? And that the reason for that is it's called denial, right? Because my drugs technically are a solution to my problem. I don't know what my actual problem is because it could be related to my past, it could be related to my esteem, all the stuff that we talked about in developmental immaturity last time. Like my ways of suppressing or supporting myself because of the wounding could be my addiction, right? And because it's not safe for me to accept it, I'm going to be like, cannot, right? So I'm not an addict, I socially use. No. How can I be an addict? Iske kitne sare fayde hain, right? Look at have you read the research on weed? It is so legal nowadays. It cannot be like How can it be a bad thing? Right? So you can hear these kind of generalized kind of arguments being made usually about addiction. So this is Fred. So yeah, let's consider him to be someone who's and again, I'm going to invite everyone to have their own languaging for it, right? So someone who is suffering from substance abuse disorder, someone who is an addict, someone who has a compulsion to use and cannot use controllably. You can have whatever language that you would prefer or what Fred would prefer. I prefer at this moment, just for the simplicity, I'm going to call him an addict. Okay. So Fred is an addict and Fred uses few drugs. Okay. So I'm just going to give some names of a few drugs, right? So let's do weed, right? Let's do heroin. So yeah, let's do the chemical ones. Cocaine. I apologize if there's spelling issues. Let's do meth. Let's do okay, feed food. And if you have guys, if you have on the chat box, if you have ideas, I would suggest you guys can kind of also start like suggesting it. Let's do chars, right? Let's do other ones as well, right? Let's do some other fun ones. Weed, heroin, cocaine, meth, chars. So yeah, let's do sort of like let's do some chemicals, okay, and let's do some non-chemicals. Let's do food, right? Let's do porn. Let's do sex, porn, sex addiction, right? What else we have? We have love addiction as well. We have food addiction. We have gambling, right? We have gambling. We have what are the process? We have workouts, exercise as an addiction as well. Let's do technically codependency is an addiction. So should we say helping others, right? Helping others like martyr, like not martyrs, but codependent people, for example, that's an addiction, codependency. So you have a few, right? In chemical addictions, am I kind of missing out? So we have weed, heroin, cocaine, meth, churs, food, porn, sex, love, gambling, exercise, codependency. Let's imagine this to be like a rough estimate of some of the drugs this guy Fred is using. Okay, so this is his drug. This is all the drugs he uses. Okay, and he uses all of. He can use one or he can use all of them. Okay, let's imagine the environment he is in. Okay. So this is the drugs that he's using. Let's imagine the environment that he is in. So he does these drugs. I'm assuming, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that he's not in the happiest of environments, right? So for example, let's assume that there's shame in his environment, right? Let's assume that there's anger in his environment. Let's assume that there is sadness in his environment. Like, let's assume that there is financial issues in his environments, money, FINAN or whatever, CL, financial issues. Less issues, he has flunked from school, right? Less issues that his brother and sister are doing better than him or her. Okay, whoever. Right. Let's assume that he has a relationship that he broke up. Let's assume he's got high drug use in the family, right? Let's assume that he has a history of abuse. Let's assume that he's got neglect. Okay. Let's assume that he has enmeshment, right? Let's assume that his father is critical, right? Let's assume that the mother is emotionally emotionally unavailable, right? Let's assume that he's got self-esteem issues. Body shaming, that's a good one. That's a really good one. He's got body shaming. Yes. Let's assume all of those things, right? Possible hai na, right? It's possible, right? Like it's possible that he's got this in his environment and he's got this is the solution. Okay. Right? There is a chance that when you will take a history of the addict, right, or of the person, you will notice that you will find some of these in his history or in the environment. Okay. That's something that you would find. Okay. So this is the drugs that he uses, and this is the environment that he's in. Okay. Then let's see and let's figure out what is he feeling inside. What is he feeling inside? He's feeling less than, right? He's feeling anger, shame, sadness. What other emotions would he be feeling? Empty is a good one. Yes, empty. Lonely. Let's do lonely. सही है. Sad हो गया, angry हो गया, empty हो गया, lonely हो गया. Fearful, obviously. Fearful. I'm not able to do something about my future. Helpless, wonderful. Oh, that's a really good one. Abandoned. Yeah, 100% helpless. Abandoned, right? Abandoned, right? These are the like, top of the head feelings, right? These are the feelings that you're like, duh, right? This is the feeling that you would imagine would be like on point, right? And so what happens is any other kind of, so we get the picture, right? So we have, this is the drugs. This is the internal feeling. This is the environment. And this is Fred's life. Okay. I'll tell you what the best parts are about drugs, because it's important to look at it from that lens. What the drugs do, and this is something that I've learned as like a really basic kind of, all of these, what they do is, and the reason why they're so good, right, is because what they do is they numb feelings. That's the best part about drugs. Each one of these drugs has its own personality, right? So each one of these drugs has its own personality. Each one of these drugs has its own style, right? So, for example, some are uppers, some are downers. In Gabor Mate's book, Realm of Hungry Ghosts, you can actually, in his book, he talks about, based on the person's own personal experiences, you can even figure out why, of all the drugs they took, they chose heroin. Heroin has its own chemical personality, right? Meth has its own chemical personality. So, for example, heroin is all about feeling a hug. Heroin is all about the oxytocin that, and it's on another level, right? So, what heroin users kind of say is that it's all about the hug, right? When you feel hugged, you feel safe, you feel secure, you feel connected, and you can see that those people, particularly who get drawn towards heroin, you notice that there's an active feeling of abandonment that's there for them, right? So those people who are in meth, right, you will notice that, for example, meth is an upper, right? It gives you stimulation, it gives you confidence, it gives you and even though one of the side effects once it runs out is anxiety, but when you're in it, in that moment, when you're in that peak, what you think and what you know is that you have no fear and you can do anything, right? So what Gabor Mate was even able to kind of identify is that there's a reason why Fred will choose a specific drug, and that drug gives you a lot of information about Fred also, right? And for that, you've just got to their books and information about what just each drug actually do, right? Food specifically has to do with, again, connection, right? Or serotonin, right? Because food is all about relationships, technically, right? So it was all about filling the void that relationships have kind of left. The name of the book is Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate, right? And it's an amazing book, and I highly recommend everyone kind of reading it, right? And so what happens is, so so let's bring it down to the basics, right? This is the environment that the person Fred was born in. Environment, Fred had no control over the environment and chose whether he was had to kind of be involved in it. So what happened was, growing up, Fred started to feel these feelings. I remember we talked about developmental immaturity. We talked about that little child kind of growing and becoming. So what happens is, one day Fred finds a solution. Okay. Now, what's happened is, now there is another mechanism that takes place here. Okay. So, what happens is that once Fred's body, not mind, body finds out that this feed can stop me from feeling this shame, hypothetically. What happens is that Fred makes this association that weed, right, is necessary for me to survive. So weed, right, equals survival. One of the main reasons why it is so difficult for us to leave addiction is because on a somatic level, if the what happens for a person is that they make this association that this drug, and it doesn't have to be weed, it could be any drugs, and it could even be a process, equals to my survival. That means that I will die if I don't take this drug. Okay. That's the internal survival mechanism that kicks in when you're dealing with a solution that helps you survive this. Can you imagine? I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but have you ever felt that intense feeling of fear that if if it like you like as if you feel like you would die if you couldn't find a solution for it, right? Like so, like imagine if you've gone through like a experience in your life and it was so intense and so dealable that you felt that the actual pain of experiencing that feeling will either destroy you, and thus you found a way to kind of avoid it, and you found a drug or a process as a solution for it. Your brain went like, that's it. Oh, that is the hull. That is the solution. And so the drug equals to survival. Okay. So what does that mean? If we're here, and for Fred, drugs equals survival. Okay. So for example, what else equals survival? Because survival and dopamine are quite associated, right? Anything that's associated with survival is also linked with dopamine. So food is associated with survival, sex is associated with survival. So all these processes, water is associated with survival. Okay. So imagine your family comes to you and says, no more water, none, no more. If you love me, no more water, right? You're going to be like, sure, I really care for you. And you're going to be like, okay, no more water, pakka, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really, my family, right? I'll do anything for you guys, man. One day, I'll do it, pakka. One day, I'll do it, man. One day, like, I'll do it now. No more water. Okay, done. And how long can a person live without water? Apparently 3 days, right? But I'm sure in Garmis, in a hot day, 5 hours pass by and you're like sweating and you're like, yeah, yeah, no more water, no more water, paka, no more water, 100%, willpowering it through, right? No more water, right? And then you have like 2 more hours passed and you're now sweating a lot more. It's like, no, I don't want any water anymore. And I don't want any water anymore. Like, in your family, like you promise no more water. You promise, right? Like you promise that you will never drink water again. And if you're like, yes, yes, I promise, I will never drink water again. And then you have 2 more hours, and the person is like now really sweating, and they don't care about who the family member is, and they're gonna rush and actually go and open up the fridge and actually drink the water. And then the family member is gonna be like, "How come you said you promised to me that you're not gonna have any more water, right? You said you were not gonna have any more water. How can you again promise to me and lie to me again and again?" Right? And this is what happens all the time, right, with addiction, right? Because there's a strong gap in the family, because what they're trying to do is that they're trying to bypass this mechanism. And what they think is that they think that their love can or technically what they think is willpower, so yeah, can overpower survival, right? And they can't. Right? It's not a question of love. It's not a question of willpower, right? Like it's not a question of the person uske paas willpower nahi hai. Because you hear a lot of the shame kind of kick in, right? That, oh my God, this Fred, has figured out a way to survive all of these things. This guy doesn't have willpower, right? And this because this guy doesn't have willpower, that's why he's weak, and that's why he's not able to kind of do this. And that's not true. Technically, his body has understood that in order for him to survive these emotions, he has to take these drugs which are associated with survival. And it has nothing to do with not loving the family. What happens in survival is that your prefrontal cortex goes offline, and I've talked about this in many times before. and your survival brain takes over, and then you go into instant gratification. And so for in the moment, it feels like that if you were not to have lied, stolen that money, and gone and taken that drugs, it would have been like I was gonna die. Right? And only after you've taken that puff, or after you kind of numbed your emotions, you go like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry. I'm never going to do that again. I promise. I promise. I'm never going to do that again. Again. I promise. I promise. I'm never going to do that again. And this cycle continues and continues and continues. And what we're trying to do is we're not really trying to address the main concern. Which is that until and unless the drug and survival don't kind of disconnect, right? That mechanism of leaving the drug isn't going to happen, right? Because no matter how much I beg, pray, what do you call it? Negotiate. I'll give you a car, and I'll give you this, and I'll give you that, and I'll give you 6 months of such money, and I'll give you 10 months of this, and whatever negotiations are done. And all of the families do those negotiations. Bargaining, yes, absolutely. They do that non-stop, right? But what they do is they're not understanding what are you really who are you bargaining with, right? Because nothing trumps survival, right? Like for example, imagine this, right? Like imagine if someone has like, let's imagine someone has like X amount of money in an island, right? And they have like coconut water, right? And imagine they have nothing else, right? What do you think they're gonna really value more? Because of what? Survival, right? Because of survival, they don't care about the money, they'll care about the coconut water, right? And that's the same thing with the addict when they are in that state that their dopamine has depleted, their body is in the state of craving, and because the body is in the state of craving, there's an active survival. There's a physiological response that your body is giving you that says that if you do not do this drug right now, you will die, right? And that withdrawal trumps everything, all the thinking, all the bargaining, all the money, all the stuff. So when you're looking at the treatment, you have to have an understanding of this mechanism that is in play. Because without addressing this mechanism, your treatment is incomplete. Your process of understanding the addict is incomplete. Because what they are doing is that they are trying to, I'll be very honest, there's a very active lack of information gap in terms of the way treatments were done before in the past and the way treatments are done now, right? And there is a lot of information that has been updated about addiction and treatment and all of those things. And that's one of the main reasons why it's very important for everyone who's working with addiction, particularly in Pakistan. There's a huge layer of addiction due to the level of stress and the trauma and the adversity that's there in the systems, right? So there's a lot of the stuff that we have to kind of work on or work with. Okay. So Fred has all of these feelings inside of him. So yeah, he's got this environment and he's got all of these drugs. And what everyone is doing is that everyone is focusing on the drug. Chhod those. Nasha chhod. Bas nasha chhod. Right? That's what workaholism. Yes, my favorite one. Right? Workaholic are as a result of stress and who can retreat as addiction. Yes, it can actually. Workaholism can actually be a really socially accepted form of addiction, right? And there are some other socially accepted forms of addiction as well, right? Codependency is a socially accepted form of addiction. Exercise is a socially accepted form of addiction, right? So addiction's context changes according to culture also, right? So these are different elements that you have to kind of be mindful for. All right. So what was the traditional way, right? So agar ye banda aata aapke paas pehle, so what would happen is you had this old way of working, which was stop the drugs, right? There's this old way of working that says put him in a rehab, make him stay away from these drugs. The more you make him stay away from these drugs, the better it is, because then what will happen is that this person will be able to manage himself better, right? Without the use of these drugs. True? Yes, that's what happens. Untrue, because as soon as he gets back into the old environment, these drugs become available. There is no place in this world where an addict cannot find a drug. No place in this world. I have never, like, I have been so surprised to see places which are, because apparently I'll give you some other cultural kind of context here. So the traditional family method of, and I don't know how this will be perceived, but this is true, right? The traditional family method of dealing with addiction is shadi kara do or bhar bhej do, right? Those are the traditional methods of, I don't know if it's Pakistani culture, but what happens here is that that's where the people's minds goes to. Yeah, get them married off so that they have responsibility. And because when they will get responsibility in this life, and that's when they will be dealing with shit, right? So you're telling this person who has these feelings to deal with more things. Genius ideas, right? That's number one. The other one is bhar bhej do, right? Because they think that it's the current environment that is creating these issues, right? And it's not like that the person is not going to find this kind of environment outside, because what he is carrying is what's inside of him, right? And no matter where he is at, whatever environment he is in, this is the issues that needs to kind of get resolved and stuff. Not a single case got improved by Shadi. I agree with you 100%. Not a single case got improved with Shadi Karago. It's the most it's I can't like there's that's a different conversation on its own in terms of like how did that even come to a person's mind, right? But it's the culture that we're in, right? Or it's the context of the culture that we're in that sadly it is still like you will hear it in the rehabs, right? It is still like, oh, we tried getting him married off too. We tried sending him Bahar also. None of it worked out. And that's why we're here for you, right? Can you help us? And I'm like, Acha, right? Like, so it's again, what, because again, there's a knowledge gap, right? Like, no matter how upset I get, the fact is that there's a knowledge gap. And that's one of the reasons why we have to have this awareness shared and abundant for people and families in particular. And that's one of the reasons why I'll spend some time with the family aspects of it as well. Okay. Okay. We equal survival. So what the old treatment was get them married off, get them like send them to a rehab, right? However, one of the main challenges that comes with addiction is the survival responses, right? Because anything that impacts your survival, you will also be receiving defense mechanisms here, right? So addicts, because of the nature of their survival or because of how intensely, or the circuits that are associated with addiction, they are so intensely integrated with survival, there's a lot of defense that comes in, right? And so every psychological defense that is in the playbook will be used by Fred in order to make sure that his survival is okay and intact, right? So he will lie, he will rationalize, he will intellectualize, he will do whatever. He will say that I study so much better on Ritalin, right? Because of Ritalin. What's Ritalin? Ritalin is a pharmaceutical drug that is prescribed to people who have ADHD, right? And it is the one of the most actively abused drugs, because nowadays, what is the number one drugs that are used in households? Xanax, right? What is the number one drugs that are used in households is pharmaceuticals, Rovotril, anti-anxiety, antidepressive medications. Or in Pakistan, off-the-counter medications, right? These are off-the-counter medications in Pakistan, right? Like you will have mothers prescribing, oh, you're not able to sleep, have a Xanax. Have a Xanax, here you go, have a Xanax, no side effects at all. What an amazing sleep you get, right? Antihistamines, oh, ooey, right? Like I get fear, man. I get fear in my body because what happens is that these all have side effects, right? They have an addictive kind of spin to it. And you have people who don't identify themselves, defense mechanisms, as addicts because they are in denial, right? Because one of the best and most powerful defense mechanism addict has is denial. It is, I've never appreciated denial until unless you see it in an addict. Like heroin addicts have some other level of, again, heroin addicts is because heroin and meth are like the most like high tier drugs, class A drugs, right? But you also have weed and food and codependency and all of that stuff. But heroin addicts and meth addicts, you see their physiology, right? Like, for example, just again, and this is an example at 11, and so you don't have to have this level of intensity, but you have people who are actively using heroin, who are losing their arms and legs, right? But they're like, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be all right. It's gonna be fine, right? Nowadays, drugs are so dangerous because of the chemical integration. Like for example, with specific drugs, there's fentanyl, which is even more dangerous, right? There's like designer drugs that have happened. Like drugs have gone way too dangerous, right? Like way too dangerous. And so there's an active denial because this denial is still better than feeling these feelings, right? Can you imagine for the addict or for Fred, these feelings are much worse than the side effects of drugs. Okay. And these feelings are even much worse than like losing or kind of the family being angry at me, right? Family's still angry at me anyways, right? Well, they've always been angry at me, right? How has there ever been a time that I'm still living under their roof, I'm still being fed by them, they're still asking me, did I eat food or not, right? I stole 5,000 rupees for them and they were still asking me, have I had lunch or not? So yeah. They always stay angry at me, right? So it's okay, right? Them being angry at me, but these feelings cannot, right? Because there would be history associated with these feelings. There would be topics associated with these feelings. There would be memory associated with these feelings. And there's not enough resources either in themselves or in the environment to deal with this. So, how does treatment begin? How does treatment really start? What's the new age form of treatment? So, the new age form of treatment is we've got to figure out how do you break this, right? And so, the only way to learn how to break this is to really understand that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection, right? And this information comes from I think it's called Rat Park. There's a Rat Park experiment, right? Specifically done on drugs. So what they did was that they made this kind of thing called Rat Park, right? And so what they did was there was an experiment that was done. Rats were given cocaine and they were seeing the effects of it. And you would see that just in a little bit, right? In the cage, the rat became like a full addict, right? So they would stop eating, they would stop mating, and they would just consistently do the drugs, right? They did cocaine, non-stop. They were on it. And so when another person looked at that experiment, right, what they saw was that it's obvious that you've kept a rat alone in a box and you have nothing to do. And thus, the only thing for them to do is avoid these feelings by doing the drugs. And that makes complete sense. So what they did was they made Rat Park, right? Which means heaven for rats. So they had slides and they had mates and they had fan and food and play, and it was like the most ultra luxurious rat cage ever, right? Where no rat felt lonely or alone or isolated. And what they saw was that the rats did not become addicted. They would use if they wanted to socially, but they would prefer connecting with other people more, other rats more. And that's experiment showed that it's the connection that gets lost, that once that connection is reclaimed, a person will feel safer, more willing to live, they will be less in survival. And that's the work, right? So what we try to do the process of it is that first step becomes, okay, that rather than asking them to stop using the drug, right? Because as soon as you start messing with this equation, their defense mechanism comes back online, right? And I want to give a caveat here. This system of treatment is only possible for those who are not in active threat of life, right? Because when you are in active threat of life, which could be for family life also, that means that there is something which is called drug-induced psychosis. Okay. If someone is in drug-induced psychosis, therapy is not going to work for them. You need to do crisis intervention, send them to a rehab, get them to go to a detox so that they can actually start having these conversations, right? So I wouldn't want this to be an assumption that this is a method that would be used for every single person. You have to really evaluate whether this is something that can be used for people who are, who are at least willing to come to treatment, right? This specific method is specifically for those who are willing to come to treatment, because you have different stages. You have people who are willing to come to treatment, and then you have people who are, my family knows that I have a problem, but I don't really have a problem. So there are different kind of stages. And then there are people who have drug-induced psychosis, and for them, it's a different chapter on its own. Okay. So for treatment, what you have to do is that you have to really understand this whole picture. Okay, so for example, this is a therapist who's sitting. This is a therapist who's sitting here, right? And so when they are looking at the case, they're looking at this whole picture. So they're looking at the drugs, they're looking at the feelings inside, they're looking at the environment. Okay. And what they're able to identify is, okay, how come they're doing this drug? For example, CHARS, right? And what they're able to identify is, okay, so CHARS is helping them with loneliness. Got it. That's the first thing that you want to find. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is use a feelings chart. Because more than likely they're not going to have this vocabulary, right? So one of the easiest way to do this is, hi, what drugs do you do, right? Okay, if I was to ask, which emotion does CHARS help you to deal with? Use a feelings chart. No, not emotion, any emotion. No, it's fine. Imagine, right? Because we know that the basic is that all of these drugs, the basic assumption is that all of these drugs are helping numb emotions. That is the baseline assumption, right? And imagine as a therapist, क्या करना है? सबसे पहले चीज ढूंढ लेनी है. Okay, why? Which emotion am I really working with? Okay. Once that is done, then what happens is, now you know that whatever this emotion is, it is so intense, wherever it comes from, it is so intense that the person currently does not have the capacity to deal with it. And that if they were to deal with it, they would die. Right? And thus, that's what they believe is. And thus, it is so important for them to deal with the drug by actually smoking the weed, because CHARS or weed, whatever, is equals to their survival. And so what we have to do is we have to first and foremost remove this message. And so how do we do it? We do it by first telling them, please don't stop using the drug. Don't. It's fine. Continue to use, right? However, is it possible to continue to use only outside the session? Okay. Is it possible if you can kind of just come to the session sober? Like just come sober. Just don't use like just don't come high. Like it's not like aapne session se pehle bhi nasha kar liya, because that is also something that will stop you from what? Feeling your feelings, right? And feeling your feelings is so important in therapy, because that's what we're really trying to work with. लेकिन अभी आप मत छोड़ना. अभी तो मैं आपको बोल ही नहीं रहा छोड़ने को. This is something that we tell the family also. The drug itself is not the problem, right? The drug is not the problem here, right? The real problem is hypothetically one of these, and you can pick out which one. And let's just, for the purpose of this example, let's just do loneliness. The real problem is loneliness. So any conversation I have about how much CHARS am I doing, and this is how much CHARS I have, and this is how much I'm using it, and this is how I'm using, and this is what is happening for me, and this is it's in my bog, and my mother doesn't let me smoke CHARS, and my father doesn't let me smoke CHARS, and CHARS and CHARS and CHARS and CHARS and CHARS and CHARS and CHARS. Waste of time, right? Because all they want to do is talk about CHARS, right? And what's happening is that I don't know what really is to talk about. In actuality, the CHARS is not the topic to talk about in addiction. In any kind of addiction treatment, the drugs are a waste of time to talk about. What you really want to talk about is, which feeling is this drug helping you manage? Which feeling is it, man? Like, you just tell me, which feeling is it that it's helping you manage? I have no beef with you managing your feelings this way. I'm just curious, which feeling is it? I am not a threat. I am not going to risk your survival because I understand how addiction works. Right? And because I'm not going to risk your survival, I'm not a threat. And what that statement also does is that it also helps you build connection with the addict. Because unlike the family and unlike everyone who has half information or no information or thinks that they have all the information in the world, the fact is that you know that you can't mess with this until unless this person is ready, right? So we're not going to waste our time talking about church because church is not the real problem. The real problem is loneliness, hypothetically, right? So I'm going to be like, just don't come high. Come with the capacity of able to feel emotions. Once you're done with the session, go smoke tomorrow. So what you're doing is you're starting setting boundaries. I'll tell you one technical trick also here. Because that's how you will work, and you're telling them not to smoke. In my experience, what I've seen is that they very much respect it because they finally gotten a kuli chut to do it without them feeling guilt and shame. Right? Because without them feeling guilt and shame, they're like, finally, I can smoke. मेरे तो therapist ने बोल दिया कि मैं तो जाके smoke कर सकता हूँ. Oh my God, this is so great, 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 great. I just have to not smoke on Thursdays, right? जिस दिन मेरा session होता है, that's fine. 3 घंटे में smoke नहीं करूँगा, बाकी सब time में smoke करूँगा. Oh, finally, 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 finally. And then what you do is that you figure out how come you were able to live up to that, right? Like, how was it that you were actually able to not smoke in these 3 hours? How was it? How was it that you had that level of control that you smoked whenever you wanted to, but when it came to actually stopping for these 3 hours, you were actually able to stop for these 3 hours? What does that mean? Curiosity. And you can have lots of these type of questions, right? That could just tell them that they have the resources, right? So all of those questions that you're going to be asking are all going to be, what do you call it? Esteem building questions, resource build questions. You can even say that they are capacity questions. यार मैंने आपको बोला था कि आप सिर्फ एक दिन नहीं छोड़ देना आपने एक दिन एक्चुअली नहीं छोड़ दी एंड सो व्हाट दे कुड आल्सो डू यूज इज दैट दे कुड आल्सो से कि यार सी देखा आई डोंट हैव अ ड्रग प्रॉब्लम right see like look I told you my family is just annoying me for no reason yeah I never said you had a drug problem right what I'm curious about is what is the feeling it's helping you manage right really don't get lost in the plot right is it most of the time accountability also that they are not smoking in this 100% you never allow food chai smoking anything any kind of substance that can influence their emotions right like you don't want any of that because what happens is it could be used as a crux but some people I know so you can't smoke but so it's easier to set that boundary anyways right oh therapy maybe don't smoke it's a closed room I can't smoke weed but I would invite you to not even smoke like an hour or two before right so that you're able to connect with your emotions because असली काम हमारा जो है वो ये जो इमोशनल नमिंग हो रही है ना उसको डील करना है चर्च तो आप पीते रहो कोई मसला नहीं है मैं तो आपको रोकने नहीं वाली चर्च पीने से right what you're really doing is you're really reframing this information for them and you're helping them build connection with you as a therapist you're helping them build safety and boundaries as well you're doing all the work that helps them realize that they can actually survive without the drug right just by setting them up that way right because by you telling them that look you were able to survive 3 hours and jab aapne chaha you were able to respect this work what happened how come you did it now, what happens is that by building these capacities, what you then do is that this is a part where it's very important to then teach them emotional regulation. Because what happens is that the addict, so you've already got boundaries, right? Then you have to teach them emotional regulation. Because what happens is that as soon as they start believing that they can actually live without it, their body goes into a state of shock, right? So, for example, imagine that you have. So imagine you've lived in a certain place all your life, right? All your life you've lived in that house, okay? And finally your family is moving to a better house, okay? And you know it's a better house. Let's have a joke here. right? Imagine you're moving from a joint family to a nuclear family, and finally you're like, oh, finally, mujhe apna kamra mil jayega, and I'll be able to have my space. And you know all of these good things that are there with you. But then what happens is that as soon as it's time to actually do it, right, actually shift, you start missing your old house, right? That is called muscle memory, right? Your body does not know good or bad. It knows familiar and unfamiliar. What that means is that no matter how much belief they start having that, oh my God, I can actually live a life without this feeling of loneliness and shame, and I can actually live a life without weed, the first thing that will kick is there will be a relapse, 100%, right? Because their body doesn't, yeah, and grief. Yes, that's why we're doing grief next time, right? And that's exactly what it is, right? So that's we have grief. 100% there will be grief, right? Because how much time have they like spent on it? How much time have they? I'm sure they have had good memories, smoking weed with their friends, trying to make connections with those people, trying to really think that they can hustle their way through life and be able to kind of do all of those things. They're really trying their best. But as soon as their body actually takes two steps forward to do the work and actually have all of these options, oh shit, it becomes too real, right? That's what really happens. It becomes too real that it's actually happening. And that's when the therapeutic alliance and the work and the information and the person's and the therapist's capacity to understand that even if it was something that was harmful for them, it really helped them deal with this for a very long time, right? And now they are having to like let go of an object that was always there for them, right? Like no matter like what was the saying that was happening? That the drug never judges and never talks back. And it always works. यानी कि आपने अगर नशा करा कोई सा भी नशा किया उसका आपको हाई मिलेगा वो आपको जज नशा खुद जज नहीं करेगा और नशा खुद आपको जो है वो नहीं बोलेगा टॉक बैक नहीं करेगा क्यों कर रहे हो ये नहीं बोलने वाला right so imagine that level of control right that you have over your body, right? Especially if you're living and growing up in an environment that you've never had any sense of control, probably even today, right? So you could see why their body would go through this active grief because now they have to kind of level up, right? Now they have to kind of be ready to kind of go through it. How will we build a connection to overcome? How we build that connection to overcome addiction? So first of all, one of the most important, easiest ways, don't judge, right? Like that non-judgment is so important because if you are telling them to stop using the drugs, you're kind of thinking that you're not seeing the real picture then, right? But if you're telling them do the drugs, just don't do it here, right? Just don't do it here. Like just continue to do drugs. मेरा मकसद आपको नशा छुड़वाना नहीं है. आप नशा तभी छोड़ोगे जब आपको लगता है आप छोड़ सकोगे. उसमें मेरा काम नहीं हो सकता, right? मुझे ये लगता है कि आप जो नशा कर रहे हो वो आपको किसी चीज में मदद कर रहा है. आपकी इमोशंस को नम करने में मदद कर रहा है. मैं जो है ना वो वहां पे काम कर सकती हूँ आपके साथ. क्या आप वहां पे काम करना चाहोगे? हमारा मकसद यहाँ पे आपको नशा छुड़वाना नहीं है. हमारा मकसद यहाँ पे आपको उन चीजों को उन वजूहात को बताना है कि आप किस वजह से नशा कर रहे हो. छोड़ना आपका काम, right? That's the languaging, right? And when you show them that this is the languaging that you're operating from, then they don't defend that much. They don't kind of resist that much because the only thing they want is for you to not let them to stop, right? Because the family is asking them to stop, everyone is asking them to stop. No one is really seeing what's happening inside. No one is really seeing what's happening inside, right? And as a professional, right, who is working with addiction, your job is to see what's happening inside. Your job is to see this mask that they've pretended to put on that's helping them survive the feelings that they can't deal with. Now your job is to build connection, set boundary, help them emotionally regulate, help them through their grief process so that they can decide whether living with this feeling, is it really that bad? Right? Is it once you help them go through this process, then you can notice and decide, is your relationship with loneliness the same after you've learned how to set boundaries and emotionally regulate and go through your grief? Or do you think that do you still need the same amount of chars to deal with this intensity? Or do you think you can adjust? Because now when you ask them that question, they have a lot more resources. They've had a lot more capacity, right? They have had a lot more time with you to build your connection with you to actually decide, okay, yeah, I think I can survive without weed because I was able to feel these feelings right now and not die. Okay. That is addiction treatment. That's how it works, right? The therapist, and again, not that easy. Just want to really say that addicts are someone wants to give a reference, psychodynamic day, when you were talking about splits, addicts will be split from these emotions very actively, right? They will not know what they are not able to feel. So that is a challenge that will come up. So what will happen is that's why it's so hard, right? Because technically they are not going to have the awareness. They'll be split. So again, I'm using language that I used in psychodynamic, right? And so what will happen is that all of these feelings actively will be picked up by the therapist. So the therapist, when they work with addicts, they feel lonely, fearful, helpless, abandoned, empty, sad. So they feel a lot of these intense feelings, right? And they say, I can't work with this. I can't work with this. I can't work with this. Too much of these feelings. I can't really work with this, right? And they feel overwhelmed and all of that stuff. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to kind of ground themselves and actually allow and become aware of this so that they can work through all of these intensities and emotions. Okay. I hope I'm able to create a picture about what addiction is really, what is it used for, and how to kind of work through it. The therapeutic tools that we have covered in the past videos are what is going to help you build the relationship, help with the attunement, work on emotional regulation, work on boundaries, right? We've done the boundary evaluation tool as well. We're going to do grief also, right, in the next session. So these are the things that you can start using before you even tell them stop doing the drug. Because what you will notice is that once they are able to manage these feelings a lot better, they are able to kind of reduce the intensity of the dependency on the drug a lot more, right? Once I am not, influence is not the right word. Once I am not triggered by my failure of not being able to reach a certain success by looking at my cousin all the time and the feeling of emptiness that it is evoking in me, which I'm not able to tolerate, and thus I have to smoke chars because no one really cared for me. Once that mechanism is kind of reduced, that now I appreciate my cousin for the successes they have had, and I've grieved the losses that I've gone through. Now I have a little bit more patience and calm and regulation with all of these things. Now I don't think I need the church as much as I needed to. I'll just do it socially, right? And so none of the work about addiction has to revolve around the drug. Does not at the stage where the client is willing to work on it at all, right? If the client is willing to work on it, this is the mechanism that I have used and I've seen therapists use, and it works. But the only thing that's required is the relationship between the therapist and the client. Is all of these feelings have to be brought forward because they are split from the client, and the client has to be able to kind of and the therapist has to be able to tolerate the intensity of these feelings, because sometimes with addicts these feelings are quite intense. Okay, so we have all of these things coming up. Okay, but here's the thing, right? This is really great, really good in a individualistic culture, one-on-one treatment therapy, right? We are living in Pakistan. This is not an individualistic culture. Here we have the family also, right? So we have the mother, we have the father, we have the siblings. Let's just put one sibling. Okay. And so what's happening in a collectivistic culture, that all of their lives are also being influenced by this little person. Okay. So what happens here, right? And this is where addiction as a family systems comes in. So addiction is not just about the person, right? Because if it was just about the person, I think it would have been a lot easier to treat also. Addiction is a family system. It's a shame of the family, right? That's what it is. So it's not just, so when you're working with addiction, in my experience, what I have seen is that you, in a collectivistic culture where the person is living in a family, you can't really work on just this, right? Because no matter how much you work on emotional regulation and boundaries, because the family system is involved in it, they will continue to feel activated and actually kind of continue to feel these feelings. The environment will continue to push. As a therapist working in a collectivistic culture, it is very important for the therapist to also understand this dynamic. It is very important. If the therapist believes that they can just work with an addict on a one-on-one basis, and sure, there are certain situations where it is possible to work with an addict on a one-on-one basis, depending on the already existing resources that they have. However, there could be many times where it's the family that has come to you, right? It's the family that has come to you, treat my kid, right? I am tired, right? Like I am exhausted. There's nothing I can do. My family is kind of coming in. And so it's very important that the therapist also has to have an understanding of how does it impact the family. And for that, it's important to understand family systems. Okay. Family systems are hero, scapegoat, enabler. I don't know if you guys know about that stuff, but I'm gonna kind of really run it by in a kind of simpler manner. So hopefully you guys can kind of have an understanding of it. So what it is about family as a system is that in a family there is these kind of roles. So for example, there is the mother. Okay, and the reason why it's important to understand this is because without understanding this mechanism, you can't really see the full picture, and it's important in addiction to understand this, right? The book that this is based on is called John Bradshaw's Healing the Shame That Binds Us. Okay, read that book. It is an amazing book to read. Okay, it is an amazing book to read. And so it's very important that when you're working in a collectivistic culture, more than likely people in Pakistan will have to work with the family when you're working with addiction. Okay. And so, what is the family system? That there's a mother and there's a father. Okay. The thing is that the mother and the father are perceived as almighties by the children, right? So, mother and father cannot fight, right? So, mother and father cannot fight at all, right? Because this person is super important for the child. This person is super important for the child, right? And a child is like what, 4 years old, 5 years old. Remember we talked about that stuff, right? But the fact is that this person is unfallible. This person is unfallible for a 4-year-old, obviously because their food, their survival, their money, and all of that stuff. However, reality doesn't work like that, right? They are fallible and they do fight. Okay, that's the reality of the situation, right? However, a child can't tolerate that. So what happens is that the child takes on roles. Someone becomes the hero. So a hero is the person that is, look at my amazingly. So just out of curiosity, I'll tell you who the hero is. If you have a sibling booking the appointment for the family, that sibling is the hero. Basic information, right? Hero would be the parentified child, right? The मेरी माँ नहीं कर सकती, मेरा बाप नहीं कर सकता, तो मैं करके दिखा देती हूँ, right? That's the hero usually, right? That's the addiction as a family system, right? Then you have the middle child, lost child. मुझे पता है but मैं आऊंगी नहीं. I know, but I'm not involved in this. I don't care. मुझे सब पता है, लेकिन I'm not interested in this. I just don't care. Usually they're the ones that are kind of ignored in the family conversations also sometimes, right? And then you have the scapegoat. There's one more actually. Oh, let me just kind of. बलि का बकरा, घर के सारे मसले उसके मसले, right? Like for example, माँ बाप लड़ रहे हैं, right? तुम्हारी गलती है, right? तुम्हारी वजह से परेशान हैं सब लोग, तुम्हारे वजह से सब लोग परेशान हैं, तुम्हारे वजह से सब लोग परेशान, you're the problem, you're the reason why everyone is always so stressed out and so upset, and you are the one, and they're not seeing how, like, technically it's mothers and fathers broken relationship that is the problem, right? And the fact that the mother and father are not compatible, and हमारे culture में divorce नहीं होता जिसकी वजह से हम लोग साथ रहते हैं ताकि हमारे बच्चे जो है वो साथ रहते हैं. It, that languaging or whatever languaging, it doesn't matter, but what happens is that these kids, right, they do not see enabler, right? They do not see these parents as human adults, right? They see these parents as infallible, which means that if इनके साथ कोई मसला हो रहा है तो हम लोग जो है वो बहुत फंसने वाले हैं. And so what happens is, what these kids do is that they take on these kind of roles, right? To what? To protect the family from what? The shame of what? That my parents fight each other, right? Because, or the shame of the family stress, or the shame of whatever the shame could be in the family. Every family has its own kind of chapters, right? But the thing is, it is similar to how an addict ke andar jo feelings hoti hain, right? That they can't really kind of manage the feelings. The family system also has secrets, right? That they can't manage. And the secrets are not, and I'll be very honest, and just so that people don't confuse this, the secret is not कि मेरा that मेरा बच्चा addict है. The secret could be that उसको grammar में admission नहीं मिला, right? The secret could be that मेरे father को job नहीं मिला, मेरे mother का ये था, मेरे बस could be anything. There could be any my mother's mother-in-law was very strict with my mother, and thus she would kind of be, oh, my father would blah blah blah. Could be any secret. That's the shame, right? And what happens is that in order to protect the family's shame, what happens is that these kids take on responsibilities, which are these, right? And then what happens is that one of them is the addict, the scapegoat. The scapegoat becomes the addict, right? And I'll tell you what the real issue becomes, right? Because the enabler, because these family members, the mother and the father, they're also part of their own family system. So what that means is that the mother can be the enabler. Let me just kind of detach that. Right? The mother can be the enabler, the father can be the enabler, the lost child can be the enabler, the hero can be the enabler, scapegoat's usually the addict. So enabler could be like any one of them, or there could be a separate sibling that could be the enabler. The thing is that what the therapist has to kind of look for, because the intention behind this particular training is not to bring up details about family therapy, but it's to bring up details particularly about what do you need to know in order to support the addict when you're working with them in regards to the family. You need to know this piece of information, that in order to work with the scapegoat, you need to find the enabler. Without finding the enabler, this system is stuck. This system isn't going to break. And as long as this system doesn't break, this scapegoat is not going to come out of this system. If this scapegoat doesn't come out of this system, is bichari ki to, like, nothing's going to happen. So I'll give you more details about this stuff. So the enabler, so okay, so I'll tell you what the fundamental kind of belief is. The fundamental belief is that all of these roles are needed to protect the family. That's what the belief is. Yani ke, and I will be very honest, and I will invite you guys to look into your own families for this, right? Because I think it's It's a really eye-opening languaging, right? So who is the hero in my nuclear family? Who is the hero in my nuclear family, right? Like, who is the person? It could be the mom, it could be the dad, it could be one of the siblings. जो आप बोलो ना सारे मतलब स्टार ऑफ द फैमिली जिसको आप बोल सकते हो, जिसका ए ग्रेड हो सकता है, जिसका सारी जिम्मेदारियां वो उठाता है, द मोस्ट रिस्पॉन्सिबल पर्सन, द मोस्ट पर्सन हु डू द पर्सन हु इज लाइक डोंट वरी आई रन द शो, डोंट वरी आई रन द शो, दैट्स द हीरो. Lost child is the person that is responsible for not getting into any fights, completely fully avoidant. I know exactly. You'll be surprised that it could even be in a family of like 7 to 8 people. Like, Purane Zamane mein there used to be like big families where there used to be like 8 kids or 12 kids. And that one khala, popo, whatever, right, would be like out, right? That of all the 8 kids, that one khala, popo, not there, right? And that's the lost child. 100%. And she would be in the middle birth order also, right? वो कहीं पे वो middle birth order पे उसका आ रहा होगा, out. Scapegoat, सारी परेशानियां हमारे घर में इस वजह से होती, which is technically not true. The only difference between a hero and a scapegoat is just the mechanism, right? Hero does it from a place of rewards, and scapegoat does it from a place of negative, right? So this is the good and perfect, and this is the bad and rebellious child, basically. The enabler is the one that says, let's keep the system as it is, right? Let's keep the peace. Let's make sure that everyone is playing their part so that mom and dad stay together, that they don't fight, right? Inki ladaiyan na ho, right? That's the thing. And it's so important in addiction, particularly, to be aware of this, because if in collectivistic culture, and this is one of the main issues of collectivistic culture, that you have to be aware of this mechanism in order to deal with this. This itself is hard to deal with, right? Like, I want to be very honest. This, if you were in a collectivistic culture, this itself is a specialization on its own to deal with this. It's insane. It's hard. You have to do a lot of work. In the collectivistic culture, you have this baggage also. You have 100% this baggage. There's no way you are, in my experience, taking the scapegoat out of the system until unless you let the enabler kind of go out of the system. It is so hard, right? Because any efforts you're going to make, the enabler is going to be like, no, it's fine. Here's some money. Here's some money, right? You can go do the drugs. बहुत तलब बढ़ी है ना, कोई मसला नहीं है. Just किसी को बताना नहीं है I'm giving you the money. Go. Don't worry. मैं जाके इससे बात कर लूंगी जिसने तुम्हारा ट्रीटमेंट लगाया. ये तो कुछ बोलता है नहीं. मैं मम्मी को संभाल लूंगी, मैं अब्बू को संभाल लूंगी. तुम टेंशन नहीं लो. I'll go and I'll do it. Right? And you will see that this enabler, which again, I want to be very honest, doesn't have to be a sibling, separate sibling. It could even be like this one, right? It doesn't have to be a separate sibling. It could even be like a mother. Yeah, exactly. It could be a mom, it could be a father, it could be just one of the siblings. It doesn't matter who has taken on this role. It could be any one of them, right? But until and unless you talk to this person, extra effort is going to be used. Extra effort, right? And you have to. And the thing is, in Pakistan, what happens is the therapist, right? This is another layer of issues that they have to deal with for their own self, right? Because if they are like, oh my God, हम लोग family से direct बात नहीं कर सकते, right? Like, oh my God, we can't go to, how can I talk to like a 30-year-old, 40-year-old uncle? How can I talk to like a auntie? I have not deal with, they will judge me. Your own stuff is going to get triggered left, right, and center as soon as you start dealing with mother and father. Left, right, and center, your own stuff is going to get triggered. Deal with that stuff, because in order to provide effective treatment for the addict, it is so important for you to be able to kind of figure out who the enabler is. Once you figure out the enabler, same process. You let them know this information, that this person has to be the main person that sets the boundaries. It doesn't matter if the hero sets the boundaries. It doesn't matter if the lost child sets the boundaries. It doesn't matter if scapegoat to karega bhi nahi. If mother and father sets the boundaries. It really doesn't matter. the main person, because this enabler, imagine hypothetically if is the mother, this enabler is going to have the same addictive withdrawals that the addict is going to have. Same addictive withdrawals, the same defense mechanisms, the same, oh, my, this is related to survival. All of the same processes are going to be exactly the same, literally the same that the addict is going to go through. And you've got to tell them that if you're not going to set boundaries with your son or daughter, right? And if you're not going to change, they're not going to change, right? And it is like you'll be surprised on how powerful the shift of the family is. Because as soon as the family shifts, right? And it's not easy for them also. And I want to be very honest, right? Like it's not, oh, they are to blame. And as soon as they become all, it becomes all okay. No, it's not that easy at all. They are also suffering from their own personal feelings, right? They also are a friend that has their own bag of emotions that says that if I don't care about my child, I will die. Right? That if I don't care about him because of whatever has happened in their environment, this is the bag that you're dealing with, right? And I want to be very clear that this is why it is so difficult to work with addictions for so many people, is because there's so many of these kind of strings that are being kind of worked with, right? And without really having a full picture of what you're dealing with, you're underserving the client, right? And there are books and there is information and there are trainings that are available that helps you become very equipped to work with addiction. And I do think in Pakistan, particularly, there is a very active need for there to be competent people who can work with addictions, whether your client comes for addiction or doesn't come for addiction, right? It is very important for you to know how all of this mechanism really works so that you can provide effectiveness of treatment, right? Because that's the whole point of this training, right? Effectiveness of treatment. And so I would really invite that so how what happens next is that you find out what the mother is or the enabler is. You, as a therapist, are going to be responsible for going to have that conversation. It's called an orientation session or an intervention session, right? You will have to have an intervention session with the family that teaches them about all of these things, right? You have to tell them that it is going to be as hard for the family because, and you can use this example, right? Like, so for example, one of the examples that I use is that with addiction, particularly, what happens is that the family says they are upset, right? And with their actions, they show that they care, right? So, for example, this addict, Fred Sayer, stole some money, right? And bought chars and got caught. Easy example, right? Now what's going to happen is the whole family is going to lose their shit, right? They're going to be like, how could you? And there's going to be someone who's going to be angry and all of that stuff, right? And they're going to be like, how could you have done this? And blah, 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 blah. Verbally, they're going to be like, oh my God, I hate, like, "वो कितनी दफा करोगे and कुछ कर नहीं रहे अपनी जिंदगी के साथ," and genuine, not coming from a place of genuine anger. They're going to have genuine anger, but they're going to say it. Okay. And then what's going to happen is that whoever the enabler is, their withdrawals are going to start kicking in, right? And then that enabler is going to come to that guy and person or then be like, khana khaya? Khana khaya? Have you eaten? And that's it. Everything becomes back to normal. Everything is back to the status quo, right? And that is the issue, right? Because I tell you what's the real issue here. Because one of the strongest, like one of the strongest things that can be used in order to treat this mechanism of survival is called attachment, right? Because attachment is like a super important need for a human. And it is the trump card that a family has, right? But they don't know how attachment works. That's the issue, right? Unko lagta hai ke like they're gonna talk about it. Like it's not about talking about it, right? So what happens is when the enabler goes, they go like khana khaya, the message that goes about the attachment is it's okay. It's no problem. They're still fine. They're angry at me. It's fine. They'll come around. They always come around. Blah blah blah. It is when this attachment starts becoming a threat, right? That's when this survival also becomes like, because this attachment is very powerful. So what that means is that after the person got caught, right? If the actions were in reverse, and it's important to tell the family this as well, that rather than saying critical things, you are saying nurturing things, but you're showing that you are upset. So rather than saying critical things, you're saying, I care for you, always using I language, right? And I can't see you like this anymore, right? And you don't ask khana khaya, right? The reason why I'm giving khana khaya example is because गाड़ी नहीं रोक सकते, पैसे नहीं रोक सकते, right? There are other boundaries that show attachment that are harder to maintain, right? Because they require, because for example, I've heard people say that, oh, if I stop him from taking the car, he'll fight it and take it from me, right? If I stop him from taking the money, he's going to fight it and take it from me, right? But no one's going to stop or fight you from asking him कि खाना खाया या नहीं खाया, right? And what we have seen, and this is something that I can bank on, right? Like what I have seen is that if the enabler stops the person from saying khana khaya, in 2 weeks, the person will come and be like, what's wrong? Less than 2 weeks, actually. Like usually it takes 2 3 days, depending on where the person is at. But you will be surprised, right? Okay, because attachment is such a strong survival need, particularly for a human being. Such a strong survival need. And the family has that with them, but they don't know how to use it. And the therapist doesn't understand how to use it in order to help the client. Because once you stop asking, showing that you care, once you stop showing that you care, the threat of attachment becomes real, right? And then the person has to decide drugs or attachment, right? And then that work kind of really becomes, and that's how what happens is that the family then starts to contribute to treatment rather than hindering the treatment process. And it's as simple as them understanding this mechanism that, and again, कि खाना खाया is not just खाना खाया, कि care, it's more about the attachment that you're kind of using against them. And so once they are able to set that bar, again, not that easy, right? Because the enabler is going to have trouble believing this and also have trouble withdrawing themselves also. So it's not going to be an easy process. Plus, how the family is upset with the addict, this family is upset with the enabler also, right? So you will be, it's very sometimes easy to find out, okay, oh, you're always the one that kind of pushes through this, right? Like everyone's angry at the enabler on this side, and everyone is angry at the addict on this side, right? So that's usually what takes place. So you have to tell them that this family will need to support the enabler in order to do this work, right? If the family does not support the enabler to do this work, it is going to be very difficult, right? For them to maintain the language, to maintain, because this is not a sprint, this is a marathon, right? It takes a lot of time and consistent behavioral changes for this system to change. And and I've seen this way too many times, and I don't know how to like share how much of a hack this is, that once you have changed the enabler's mindset, right, you will be surprised on how these guys will kind of, they will come around, right? Because no one is willing to pay the real price, which is the attachment price, because that's the real wounding, right? And so what happens is that they get through it. You will see that now that you have the family working with you, you have understanding of this work can actually be done in a collectivistic culture, right? And so there is this kind of additional detour that has to kind of take place in order for the system to be kind of effective, right? Because without that, the system isn't really fully effective. You don't have to do long-term therapy with them. You just have to share them this information so that they also are aware of it and they are part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because for a lot of the families, what happens is that there's a knowledge gap also. They go like, I don't know what's happening with them. I don't think therapy is working. I don't think therapy is not working. They have all of these kind of fears and anxieties that just adds to their dysregulation. And so when you have informed them about, okay, this is your part, you do this part, in order for us to be able to work with him on his own, this is what's going to happen. Once you tell them, the therapist now has a full picture of the system, right? Has a full picture of the system. And now, I'll be very honest, treatment has become even more effective, right? So step by step, I'm just trying to just imagine someone's kind of got all of these tools down, right? So imagine someone knows this stuff, using it, knows this, using it. Now, if you have any non-verbal trauma processing memory, right? Like treatment in your arsenal. So for example, up now that you have done all of this work, right? And now if you have something like an EMDR under your belt, or if you have even if you have some NLP techniques under your belt, right? Or you have some other kind of technique like a Gestalt or something under your belt, then what will happen is that now once this whole setup is done, now you deal with the back end, right? जो आपका past history memories जिसके वजह से ये emotions जो है वो और intense हो रहे हैं. And you will be surprised that this will create such effective treatment for you. Like a lot of people, they go around in circles when it comes to addiction work, because all they're doing is they're talking about how much did I use and when did I use and why did I use it, and this time I had a relapse and that time I had a relapse, and it's nothing to do with the work at all. There's nothing to do with the work. All of this is the work, right? And this is what you guys need to be focused on when it comes to addiction treatment. At least that's what my experience has been. I've been working with addiction for like way too long now. I think it's been like 9 years now. I've been working with addiction, right? And I've seen it in rehabs. This system is not used in rehabs, right? The rehabs use their own 12-step systems. What they believe in is this kind of remove this, and then they don't work on this stuff in this level of detail, right? They don't even work on empowering the family. They just do like once a week lectures, and even the detailed therapy that is required with the family is not even available for them, because their intention is to just manage the situation, right? So this is where all the addiction work is at. I really hope so this is the addiction part, right? This is the family part now, which I have kind of covered as well. There is one more part which I wanted to kind of cover, but I'm thinking that I can cover that in like a different kind of day, because I think this itself is like a lot of content, and I don't want to kind of overrun the content in particular, because there is a whole section of work about love addiction and love avoidance, right? Which I think is really beneficial, and particularly non-chemical aspects of it, because it's sometimes very overt to see the chemical aspects of it. It's a chemical addictions, and there's a certain pattern that a chemical addiction person will kind of follow, right? However, when it comes to non-chemical addictions, right, there's a pattern becomes different because it's very covert, right? Non-chemical addictions aren't really that visible, so I really wanted to kind of I do think that there'll be more value if I keep it for like just before grief. Let's just do it like that, right? Yeah. Also food addiction as well. Specifically, food addictions are related to it. Absolutely, right? So food addiction is amazing, right? Because food is people. Food is people, right? So for example, food is an amazing way to connect, right? So I think this is a really good thing to kind of leave you with. If anyone is working with food addiction, right? You ask that client, okay, if food was a person, what gender would it be? Okay, would it be a male or a female? Okay, what kind of personality would it have? Okay, would it have like whatever the personality is, right? What kind of facial features would it have? What color hair would it be? What kind of height or weight would it have? If food was a person, this is what physically as a person, this is what it would look like, Okay. Then you ask them, who does that person remind you of? Okay. And then you ask them, what is the type of relationship that you have with that person? Okay. And how does that mirror or relate with your relationship with food? And you'll be surprised, right? In terms of what's really being worked on, right? Because this is the kind of questioning or understanding or kind of way you help break those splits, right? Because it's not like the answers are coming from the client, right? The answers are all coming from the client, but they're not coming from the conscious awareness of the client. If I had asked them directly, right, or if I asked them, does food remind you of someone? They will be like, no, how does food remind me of someone? You have to build the questions to allow it to be answered by your unconscious mind in order to break the split, right? If it was asked too directly, too much defense mechanisms would have come up. It would have not allowed you to go there, right? So this is how you, if you can figure out how to get to these places, right? And I'll be very honest, one of the other important ways that you do get to these places is by getting to these places for yourself, right? And that's like one of the early days, right? Like day one, day two, this is all what we've done, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Right. So we had a food addiction training that was talking about this stuff in a lot more detail. Right. And so this is like addiction is sort of like, I do feel like this is a subject or a topic that a lot of people work with, whether they work with it overtly or covertly. And I do think that it's important for us to remove the archaic way of treatments, which is all about abstinence and stop the drug use and all of that stuff. And it really undermines what the addict is or the client is really doing. They're using the drugs to protect themselves. Simple. Anyone is using a drug to protect themselves, even if it's hardcore heroin use or hardcore meth use or kins use, and even if they're at their death's door, for them, that kind of death was also much more acceptable than actually feeling these feelings that they're split from. They don't even know that they have these feelings stored. And that's where the therapist comes in. That's where the job is. And that's where you got it. I really hope this was helpful today. I hope this was able to kind of give a little bit of a comprehensive understanding of what addiction is and how it works, and specifically in a collectivistic culture, how we're going to work with it. I do agree. Someone pointed it out like really, really epically that what you're going to be left with, and one of the main things that you're going to be working with is grief, right? And that's the thing that we're going to be covering in the next session, right? So in the next session, we're going to be all talking about grief. Grief is like the topic, right? Like if you have trauma work, you have grief. You have grief is as a therapist should be in your arsenal. You should enjoy is not the right word, but definitely be super, 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 super comfortable with dealing with grief, right? Because it's gonna come up in each and every single stage of your treatment. It can come up, and the more refined your work is with it, the more nuanced you are, the more you have that capacity, the easier you can take a client through it, no matter how intense the grief could be for them. So that's where it's at for me today. I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, I'm going to really invite you guys to write it on the emails. I am a little late on replying to some of the questions that are already there, but I'm really hoping to get to them during the weekend as well. So any kind of questions, threads, thoughts, comments you guys have, say it on the email thread, and we can kind of just take the conversations there. Right? So thank you guys for being with me, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Okay. All right, guys, take care.